Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Roland Petz, Executive Director here at the Australian Chamber of Commerce in South Korea. Today, I'm presenting part two of a three-part webinar series, Post-COVID Transformation and Medtech Opportunities in Northeast Asia. We have three very special guests covering three different markets, and today we're covering Korea with our special guest, Ruslan Tursunov, who is the Project Manager in Intralink Korea.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ruslan Tursunov, originally from Uzbekistan. I have lived in Korea for almost 11 years now, and I'm fluent in Korean. I started my career at the biopharmaceutical company in Korea as a product manager for biopharmaceutical products, and I was in charge of the client and dealing with clients in Central Europe, Eastern, Western Europe, and some Central CIS countries. And after joining Intralink, I have mainly focused on life sciences and medtech sectors. And so far, I've helped about over 24 of clients in genomics, precision medicine, advanced medical technologies to enter the Korean market. Today I will be providing some overview over about opportunities in the medical devices market in Korea, which is rapidly growing due to the government support and easing regulations and so on and so forth. Before going to the details of medical devices market, I would like to give you some general overview of South Korea. The population stood at 51,780,000 as of December 2020, and 15.7% of the population is aged at 65 or over. And as you can see here, this is becoming a major problem for the government, and I'll talk about it a bit later. It would be okay if it was the only problem. The thing is, fertility rate is also decreasing dramatically. You can see here. And in 2018, South Korea entered the world's anti-record range, which is fertility rate was below 1, 0.98 or 7. And it went down further in 2019. It was 0.92. And it is despite the government's support. Now, over the past 10 years, the government has been investing like about $200 billion into promoting birth, but it's not happening. And especially in 2020, we're afraid that because of the uncertainties due to the COVID, there might be some decrease. We'll see, and we will keep observing this, and then we'll draw some conclusions. And economy-wise, South Korean economy is world's 12th and Asia's 4th largest economy, with a GDP of 1.7 trillion US dollars. And you can see the growth here from 2010. It's been growing exponentially, like you can see here. And in 2020 as well, despite the Corona situation, we have seen a stable growth in the Korean economy, especially in exports due to PPE and other medical devices that have been required from Western Europe, Western countries, and so on. So, and also Korea is one of the major investors into R&D. The country spends slightly under 5% of its GDP into R&D, and this is the highest R&D spending to GDP ratio in the world. And in absolute terms also, it's no slouch. The country is among top 5 after China, US, Japan, and Germany. And it spends about $75 billion into R&D only. So, Korean Ministry of Health and Welfare is in charge of the citizens' health and welfare, as it says, and it provides near universal healthcare under the National Health Insurance Service system that covers about 97% of the whole population. And despite spending only 8.1% of the GDP into healthcare, the country has a high quality, efficient, and affordable healthcare system. And it was ranked the 4th most efficient healthcare system by Bloomberg in 2018, by the way. And South Korea boasts large hospital bed to population ratio, which stood at 13.5 per 1,000 citizens, and it's second only to Japan, and it's quickly catching up with the country as well, with its neighbor. This is important. Over 62% of medical devices in the market, I mean, the demand for medical devices is supplied by US, Europe, and Japanese companies, and some other companies as well. But mostly these the supplies from these markets are dominant in the Korean market. And there is one of the important factors contributing to the use of high-end medical devices and equipment from overseas is that most Korean doctors are educated in the US or Europe or Australia, for example, in Japan. And when they come back to Korea, they request their hospitals to purchase this type of high-end materials or devices so that they can continue providing their own practices, their services at a high standard. And US accounted for 51% of the whole imports, and Germany 18%, Japan 11%, and then other markets. And of course, if we don't talk about the dominance of a few big five hospitals, it's going to be unfair to say, okay, I talked about everything. No, the only big five hospitals that are located in Seoul treat around 5% of all outpatients. And according to some expert estimates, they treat about 70% of all cancer patients in the country. What does it mean? It means there is a very, very good place for clinical trials. So if you come to Seoul, you can speak to 5 hospitals who are treating 70% of all cancer patients. So you have all the patients that are needed for your trials in one place. So this is a hotbed for clinical trials. Okay. The Korean medical devices market was estimated to have reached $7.1 billion in 2019, making it the 13th largest medical devices market in the world. And it's still growing. If you look at the past 5 years, it has been growing at the annual growth rate of 10.4%. And last year in 2019, we saw a record high growth, 15%, about 15%. But it is still heavily reliant on imports. And if you look at the import growth rate, it was about 10% annually for the past 5 years. And last year, it grew 13.5%. And top 10 imported medical devices include contact lenses, stents, MRI and CT systems, knee prostheses, and IVD reagents. And there's one interesting fact about the imported devices. Ophthalmic lenses, 99.2% of all ophthalmic lenses were imported from only APAC countries. So I would assume that most of our listeners would be interested in understanding the regulations. That's a prerequisite for medical device sales in any country. So we will go to the regulations now. Certification is required for all medical devices for production, import, or export in Korea from the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, that is the equivalent of TGA, Therapeutic Goods Administration of Australia. And for the registration purposes, medical devices are classified from class 1 to class 4, based on the increasing risk of medical devices to human health or human body. And class 1 only requires notification. You can just notify the MFDS and then keep selling your products. You don't need any approval or anything. But when it goes to class 2 or class 3, 4, you will need to have a specific approval from the MFDS. And as soon as you get the approval, you can start selling. Otherwise, no. And so I can give you some examples for these classifications. For example, surgery table can be class 1, or coronary stent can be class 4. Anesthesia systems can be class 3. But just make sure that before you come to Korea or before you apply for regulatory approvals, you need to make sure which class your product is in, because even if it's called the same name, it was the same name, depending on the material you used, it can be it can fall into a different classification. So let's say even stents, if it's made of metals, it can be a different class. If it's made of plastic materials, it can be in a different class. So it really depends on what you have used in the target. So reimbursements. National Health Insurance Service is in charge of everything related to reimbursement, and it covers or decides not to cover, how much to cover, and sometimes even if it has already been decided about the coverage, if let's say the burden of a patient is too large, then NHIs can extend the coverage. It really depends, case by case. And the major payment system is fee for service, but DRGs are available for certain types of illness groups. I'll talk about this in this next slide. So more on the reimbursement. So any medical device can apply for reimbursement application reimbursement after the regulatory bodies approved for sale in South Korea. And if there is a kind of similar predictive device already available in the system, then your product can get the code and subsidy allotted for that specific device. It means, okay, it has been already decided, you have no choice, you will accept that. And then it's easier as well. But if there's no similar product already in the system, then you will need to go through a specific process for reimbursement for approval. And there is one more thing. Even if your product is similar to the existing one, but you think that your product is more efficient, in that case, you may decide, all right, no, I'm not agreeing with this subsidy. I want to get more. Then you can apply for a higher reimbursement subsidy, and you will need to go through a reimbursement approval process, which may look at the efficiency and so forth. Then, if HIRA or NHIs decides on the if they agree with your product and claims, then you will get the allotted subsidy, higher subsidy. Reimbursement included under the procedure fee. We're talking about DRGs. In 2002, the South Korean government implemented DRGs, voluntary DRGs, and then they trialed for about seven or 10 years, and then in 2013 it became mandatory for all hospitals. Actually, this DRG has been adopted from the Australian DRG system, so it's quite similar. It was at least quite similar at the beginning, and now all the hospitals have to work under DRGs, and they have to accept for 7 disease groups only, and the normal patients will pay only 20% of the whole procedure fees, and some other patients with specific how can I say preferences, they can pay less than 20%, up to only 5%. And in 2009, the government implemented another type of DRGs that's called new DRGs. And this is available for 567 disease groups, only in about 100 appointed medical institutions. Most of them are national institutions. And for private hospitals, this is voluntary. If they want, they can do that. Yes, non-reimbursable products. What does it mean? It may be old products that have lost their efficiency to rival devices, and it has become really obsolete. Then the HIRA decides not to extend the coverage for another year or for the future. And it might be other types of devices that are really, really new, but they cannot prove more efficient than the existing ones. So they were not allowed reimbursement, but they are still allowed to be sold in the Korean market. And there might be some products that didn't at all apply for reimbursement. So these are the non-reimbursable products. What does it mean for foreign manufacturers? There are advantages. If there is a reimbursement, it means the cost of the product would be borne by the National Health Insurance Service. It's easy. Patients are, receptive to getting this kind of, to get to hospitals using these kind of devices. And distributors are quick to adopt these products because they're easy to be sold. But disadvantages are that if your technology is slightly better than the existing ones, but it cannot prove much better than the existing ones, in that case, your product may not be allotted subsidy. So you will be outside the reimbursement system, which will be difficult for your company to sell in the Korean market. Yep. And it will be difficult to, show the, value proposition to hospitals if it is outside the reimbursement system. So what are the key drivers? Aging population. Yes, rapid graying of the Korean population has become a major problem for the government as to how to service this large population and, and provide really good, high quality medical services at an affordable prices. That's why the government has been looking at the use of digital health. And also, as you may already be aware, Korea has the highest number of plastic surgeries per capita because it has been so famous. Some other people from some other nations are flying to Korea to get plastic surgeries. This is also increasing the use of medical devices here. And the prevalence of diabetes due to the modern and Korean diet has been increasing from 1.5% to over 10% of the population of the past 40 years. And although it's slightly decreasing, continued smoking in Korea has, become the major cause of lung cancer. And actually, lung cancer is the major cause of cancer deaths. 23.4% of all cancer deaths occur because of lung cancer. And this is also increasing the demand for cancer treatments and therapeutics. Market trends, if we talk about this, new focus on quality and standards. Finally, recently, last month, at the end of October to be more precise, the long-awaited regulations came into force, which require all the medical devices on the market to be reviewed periodically for quality and efficiency. It didn't exist before. That's why even if some products have been registered 20 years ago, they have been on the market, even if they are not really of high quality. What does it mean? This means a lot of opportunities for foreign countries. Why? Because Australian standards, Japanese standards, or US standards are really, really high than the ones that exist in Korea. And their products registered mean the registration of their products in those countries means it's easier for them to enter the Korean market. And for companies who have registered their products 20 years ago, they will either have to come up with a new technology or leave the market. And in the near future, there will be a really big gap to be filled by foreign companies. And as we all know, due to the MERS in 2015 in Korea and COVID-19 globally in 2020, there is a strong drive to improve infection control quality. So they're looking at telemedicine, monitoring, and so on and so forth. And there is an increasing need for digitization, connectivity, and patient data management in hospitals. And yeah, I will talk about a little bit about the digital health market here. It's rapidly growing. It's expected to reach $5.9 billion in 2020. So it's coming to the end. And there is a strong government drive, including investment and deregulation. But there are still some regulatory barriers around data sharing and telemedicine, which have to be dealt by the government. Of course, they're being dealt step by step, but it still requires some more effort. And as we have seen, Corona has impacted all aspects of life. And still in Korea, although there are some resurgence happening here and there sometimes, we can see that COVID-19 has been well in control, under control, and everyone was conducting business as usual. In-person trade shows and meetings are happening, even if they are rarely happening, they are happening in Seoul and in other areas of the country. This is the total number of infections in the country. It's not daily infections like in other European or American countries, continent. This is the mortality rate as of December 11. And total cases per million population is 782. This is really, really low. This was achieved with the preparedness of medical institutions and government institutions, as well as the ability of the population to stand with the government against any crisis, because they have been listening to the government, they've been following most of the rules, and now we can see that it's fairly well in control. And yep, actually, so South Korean companies turned this crisis into opportunities because Corona. When Corona happens, some Korean companies came up with new kits, and they started selling to the US, Europe, and now the awareness of Korean market has significantly increased. Okay, this is part of the one of the focus areas for the Korean government, and that's why the government is trying to help by loosening the review process and so on. Yep. There's one thing that I would like to highlight. There is high quality medical data available in Korea. Even if it was not mandatory, most hospitals started implementing, AHR and AMRs in hospitals. Now it is 96.3% in hospitals and 95.7% adoption rate in clinics. It means there is a lot of high quality data for your, solutions to come and to be implemented here. Excellent ICT infrastructure and so on. Quickly about the areas of interest in digital health information technologies. So due to the demand for connectivity and demand for flawless flow of information, hospitals are now giving up paper documents and now becoming more and more digitized. Seoul University Buntang Hospital was one of the was the first hospital to go 100% digital in APAC, and now more other hospitals are following, which means they will need connectivity devices and solutions to make sure that everything is digitized. And the South Korean government decided that AI and big data is one of the major key drivers of the economy, and they passed a special regulation to review AI-based medical devices. In 2018, there were only 4 solutions, AI-based solutions available for use, but in 2020, it became more over 20 now. And until 2019, wearables and no wearable device was available for use as a medical device. But in 2019, as part of sandbox regulations, the government allowed Mimo Watch to be used, and then it became the first wearable device eligible for reimbursement in 2020. So we're seeing this kind of developments in the digital health area, and the government is supporting, so there will be more and more developments in the near future. And we can see the use of blockchain in medical applications for example, safe storage of medical data and secure transfer of medical data between patients and hospitals, or hospitals to hospitals, and hospitals to government institutions. I'll talk about telemedicine quickly in this slide. I think I don't have a lot of time here left. So can you imagine a country where telemedicine is not allowed by law? But if the only 20% of Koreans participated, it would create a market of 1.8 billion US dollars. And that's why the government started using it, even if the President Moon Jae-in was against telemedicine at the beginning when he was campaigning for presidency. After becoming a president, he said the government officials came out and said, okay, we're allowing telemedicine, and they actually allowed limited telemedicine in one big province from July 2019. As soon as the results are out, we will see how the government will continue. And also there is one survey that shows that 54% of Koreans would be open to trying telemedicine. And of course, due to the COVID-19, the government allowed, can you imagine, it's illegal, but the government allowed hospitals to use telemedicine, to communicate with their patients, because their patients were feeling that they were left alone, as they were not allowed to visit some hospitals due to the corona, outbreak. So the doctors also started, changing their minds a little bit towards telemedicine. And now, because the word telemedicine is a taboo, the government is using another word for this, that's called untitled medicine. So we'll see the development soon. I've gone through the opportunities a bit earlier. Now we'll go through quickly. There are opportunities in healthcare and medical technologies for age-related conditions. Aging is a problem. And clinical IT systems and medical imaging information systems that are, hotspots, and developing solutions for cancer or diabetes, hypertension, robotics-based surgery and treatment devices, and big data AI solutions for diagnosis, drug development, or in treatment or monitoring services, and medical equipment for telediagnosis and monitoring. Very quickly about doing business in Korea culture. Korean SMEs tend to be, fast moving because they're driven by a ferocious competitive environment, and project management tends to be ad hoc. So it requires a lot of room for, a flexibility from their partners. And yes, some people say that personal relationships are really important in Korea. Yes, I agree with them, but Koreans are still, open to cold outreach because, relationships should start somewhere, and it is true in Korea as elsewhere. And Koreans are fierce negotiators. They believe that there is a lot of room for negotiation, believing that you are willing to give up something for the sake of working with some Korean big, large institutions. And market considerations, you as a medical device manufacturer, you already know that you need a local partner office in Korea in order to import any or export your products to South Korea. So you need to get it right. Otherwise, it may lead to flat sales or failure. Localization is important, but it really depends on what you're offering in Korea. And medical regulations. Medical Device Acts and PIPA are one of the stringent ones in Korea. So you would like to make sure that you are sure that your products meet the requirements or are not outside the legal premises. And some things to note is that regulations are partly available in English. So even if they are available, they are not up to date. They are translated really late. And you should make sure that you have a local support, because Koreans expect a really high level of support in Korea. These are the industry-related organizations and events. That's it. Thank you very much.